Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to Neurodivergent Story Hour.
Basically.
But kind of not. We have a guest today, and I'm going to go ahead and let Lou Berger introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Lou J. Berger. I'm a Denver-based author. I've mostly written short stories. I'm working on a novel. I've been working on the beginnings of multiple novels for years, and so I've got probably 20,000 words for each of them. And one day I'll finish a book.
Right?
Yeah.
Short stories are so addictive, though.
It's because I can only hold so many spinning plates in my head at one time.
Exactly.
So if I can think of 5 really good scenes, that's a 10,000 word short story.
Yeah.
So,
What was your most recently published? Is it Apex?
No, they won't.
Or was it, what was it in? It was in one of the big markets.
Clark's World.
Yes. Yeah.
Back last July. Yeah. And I got the cover. I took the picture of the cover and I went to Kinko's and I had one of those canvas on a frame things made of the cover. And it's right there over my monitor.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, that's a big get. I had him hold one of my stories for like a few weeks and that was a triumph on its own. Right. So I was like, I'm not in there yet.
It is.
I also, because he stopped taking horror a couple of years ago, so that's what I write. So I haven't submitted anything in a few years either. Since he stopped taking horror, I was like, okay, well, if I write a fantasy or sci-fi piece, I will definitely send it that way, but it's not really.
Sam Knight of Sam Knight Publishing published a very short alien gray story I set back in the 1970s in rural North Carolina. It's called Sue's Visit. And the main character is a 9-year-old girl. And her mama, while parking the truck in the rain outside the diner, accidentally backs over Sue and then brings her in, sopping wet. And like, I don't know, is this a monkey? Is this a dog? What did I run over? And Sue opens her eyes and goes, "Madam, I am not a monkey." The alien gray speaks in a Southern accent.
Nice.
She learned how to talk on the Andy Griffith Show. So Sam,
what was that in?
It's in What Really Happened. There's back there.
I like that. We're saying you've got your books like right behind you. Mine are this way.
That way.
That's where my what is it? My ego shelf or whatever it's called is where. Yeah. Except it's now a couple shelves because. I'm writing short stories for a while, right?
It's the Shrine of Pride. That's what it should be called, the Shrine of Pride.
Over here, these are all people I know in the books that they've written and signed to me. So nice. There's a bunch.
I had a bunch of those, and then I had my shelves, and then I realized when I started doing the tricker read stuff, I was like, me keeping the books on my shelves isn't getting exposure for my friends.
Right.
And so then I started putting those books out in the tricker read so that maybe some people would discover them and maybe buy their books and stuff, right? So I kind of changed my thinking on that because in the beginning, of course, you keep them all because they get signed to you and all this stuff, but also like it feels like the right thing to do because I've heard people be upset when they discovered their books at like a Goodwill or something like that, and they've discovered their signed book and it has the name of who they gave it to and they know who gave up their book or whatever and donated it. And so I kept them and I was like, yeah, I don't think this is doing anything. This isn't making money for my friends. So I'd rather make money for my friends instead. So exposure is what I've defaulted to.
The best way I think is to leave reviews on Goodreads and Amazon.
Oh yeah. And I do that. And whenever I'm reading a book, I take a screenshot or a picture, depending on where I'm reading it. And I put that on Instagram and on my Facebook, my author Facebook. So, I get it out multiple ways, and I usually will do a recap at the end of the year. And I also put what I've read in my newsletter. So, That's nice. It's out there. Definitely frustrated with lack of reviews myself. So I'm like, Don't tell me you liked it. I'm getting you know, like, okay, that sounds rude. I appreciate when somebody writes to me and say they liked it, but how you can really, really help me is to leave a review so somebody else might read it and I might pop up in some algorithms or share on your social media, like I'm talking about doing for people. Like, that's what I need. And the crazy thing is, it's so many author friends that have done that and not left a review, and they know better. You know, like, so I think I'm just always going to be eternally frustrated after a new release when I'm dealing with that.
Yeah. I get that. And it's not like we're competing with each other. We're like standing on the banks of this enormous river, let's call it the Amazon, and we're throwing rocks in, and our rock sinks right away unless somebody puts a little balloon on it, which is a review. And if it floats high enough, it'll be carried down, but otherwise they just sink and nobody hears from them again.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been, in the last 3 weeks, I've been to Oregon, then to Arizona, and I've been all over the place. I was at an Airbnb, and Jeff's always like, we get there and there's a bookshelf, and he's like, see, you should have brought a book and left it there. And I'm like, I absolutely should have. And I forget every time till I'm there that I could have left a book on the bookshelf. Like, dang it. But have you guys traveled at all this summer?
Nope.
Yeah. In May, I went down to Florida.
Okay.
Took my son and my girlfriend, the four of us, her mom lives with us. And so the four of us went down for a wedding. Kelly has one kid, and that one kid got married in May in Florida. In May. Hot. So Kelly rented this Airbnb or Vrbo, whatever it was like a 5 or 6 bedroom mansion with a pool and all. Ooh. We grew up in South Florida. I met her in high school, and we're used to humidity and flying cockroaches and the people that think I-95 is a race car zone and drive accordingly. And so my son, who had heard stories about me growing up in South Florida, was both liking and hating South Florida. And I'm like, this is May. This isn't even hot yet. I mean, it's hot, but it's not even hot Miami hot. So yeah, that was fun. I did not leave a book.
Right. That's the thing. I know there are people that think of that all the time, and there are people who do not. I'm one of those who do not. Yeah. It takes a certain amount of ego in some ways, I guess. But it does. Yeah, I grew up in a few places, but it's Oregon, Maryland, and then here in Colorado, right? But I was born in California. I just didn't live there very long. But I thought I knew humidity and heat from Maryland. And then I went to Florida in, I think it was like August or September. And I just remember, I think it was August, because it was for a work thing for my husband, and stepping off that plane and being instantly just drenched. Mm-hmm. Like just moisture was suddenly all over my body after living in Colorado, the high desert, since I was 12. And I was like, I am not prepared for this. I'm not prepared for this at all. It's a whole different kind of thing if you've not been to Florida.
I took him to see Messi play soccer. And because I'm a dad and I can't stop myself, my son's a huge soccer fan, and he really wanted to go see Messi play. So I got tickets on the front row, the one that you look down and you're looking at grass, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Not the grass of the field, but the grass that in 20 feet, 30 feet in front of us becomes the field. So I got really good tickets. And we parked the car, the rental, about a mile away, mile and a half. And took an Uber, so we didn't have to deal with $20, $40 parking. We just parked in a parking lot and then took an Uber from the parking lot to the place. Oh. And Uber does this really cool thing called surge pricing, which has to do with if more people need a ride at a certain moment, if there are suddenly more riders than drivers available, they escalate the price. And the reason they escalate the price is because people who really must take the ride will pay that higher value, and the drivers make more. And if not, they'll walk. So we walked the mile and a half in the dark through business park, street lit. Sometimes there were sidewalks, sometimes not. back to the car, because by the time we got to a point where the surge pricing, we had left the surge pricing umbrella, we only had 3 or 4 blocks to go. And I'm like, I'm just walking it. And he's like, Dad, this is a very dangerous neighborhood. No. So I'd been in dangerous neighborhoods in Miami. But as we were walking, I mentioned casually, for the first 24 years of my life living in South Florida, my underwear was never dry. Ever. Ever. And you walk a mile, you'll get chafed. And he's like, Dad, it's like somebody threw me in a pool and it's not getting dry. South Florida. Welcome.
That's right.
Yep.
You take a shower and then you're instantly covered with sweat as soon as you get out of the shower.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. I was talking about, so I had my hotel in Arizona. I went there for work. The hotel had a free shuttle because I was doing. I am one of the bookkeepers at the job. So of course I'm trying to save money when I travel. So that's how I ended up getting home after midnight on the way home because it was the cheapest flight. But I picked a hotel that was walking distance in Arizona. By the way, it was 113 the day I left, and it was that same temperature like every day I was there.
Yep.
But the shuttle driver, I was talking to him on the way to the hotel, and we were talking about the heat because he had just moved there from Nashville, Tennessee. And he was like, so I know heat. And he was like, it's actually preferable here because there's not humidity like there is or the amount of humidity in Nashville. But yeah, he was like, I'm used to it, but still, he was dreaming of oceans. At this point, he's like, next place I move is going to be oceans. But yeah, I feel like I couldn't. At this point, my body is no longer able to adapt. It's like, no, I don't want to. I know it would eventually, but yeah, man, it was just so hot. And you know what? Dry heat, great. Still gross.
It's still heat.
Because I posted it's grossly hot and I don't like it. And I set myself up so that I had to walk to work, right? So
sweat. You come in just drenched.
Right. And that's what I talked to him and I was like, yeah, I said, when I first went to Georgia, I was realizing that nobody there can care if you have underarm circles.
Right.
Or if you've got under boob sweat, or you've got sweat down your back that's visible through your shirt. Because I remember asking somebody, I was like, how do you keep dry? And they're like, we don't.
We don't even try.
No, we all know we're going to be sweating and we're not going to judge each other for it. And I'm like, I like that. Because I'm pretty sure if you have underarm circles here in Colorado, they're like, ew.
What happened to you? Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And I'm like, well,
what is wrong with
hot? Jeez.
Well, here in Colorado, our sweat disappears so fast it doesn't leave traces in our clothing, but we dehydrate so fast.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I also have lotion all over the house. Mm-hmm. But then I went to that first time again in Florida, I put face lotion on and I could feel it sitting on my skin for the rest of the day. Like it never soaked in.
Right.
I'm pretty sure when I washed my face that night, I was just washing off lotion and then putting more on. So
that's right.
But then I did try not to wear it and my skin still felt like dry. So yeah, no, I have turned into a mummy, a desiccated corpse here in Colorado. And there isn't.
Welcome to the club.
It would take years to get out of that. I guess I'll discover that we were talking about before we started recording places we could live that were not the US for reasons. And yeah, like my husband and I are going back to Mexico and we're going to check out a different city and we're going to start looking around at places because it's been like looking at retirement stuff, right? That's why I started looking at, and there's places you can go where you can retire with the money that we're probably going to have at that point. Cause I don't understand how you retire in America at this point, unless you're really well off. So yeah, like Thailand looks gorgeous and you can get really cheap medical care, but actual quality medical care for that out of pocket, no need for insurance. And eat Thai food, you know, that's not, I'm not
over there.
About that.
Over there, to repeat a joke from an old comedian, over there, they don't call it Thai food. It's just food.
It's just food. Yeah. Even though here we call it American food. If there's an American food restaurant, I've seen that like when you're mapping out place, they're like American food. And I'm like, what
is that?
Burgers? What is that?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Pork chops, meatloaf.
I mean, technically barbecue is American food in its own way. We learned about the origins from Native Americans actually, and then with the pit roast, there was a tribe that did that. So yeah, A lot of interesting stuff, but also a mix from other cultures. We saw, because it was at Mountain of Authors, and it was Adrian Miller. Is that the right name?
Yeah, I think so.
And he did a whole thing on barbecue in America in the background. And boy, was I hungry.
That was called Black Smoke.
Black Smoke.
It's a really good book.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I was going to check it out. And he's a Colorado. I think he was Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Denver author. So,
because I went into it as a snob. What did somebody from Denver have to say about barbecue?
But he traveled and he tried it everywhere.
He tried it everywhere. And I trusted the person who recommended the book to me. He was an owner of one of the local food trucks. Oh. And he goes out of nowhere, "Have you read Black Smoke?" And I'm like, "No, what's that?" And I just was like, "Okay." And I trotted off and got it out of the library and read. I didn't read the whole thing. I read most of it.
Was it a barbecue food truck?
No, it was Doki Doki. It was Japanese.
Funny. Okay. All right, never mind then.
Yeah, I did. That would have made a nice circle, but no, it didn't. My life never works that way.
Oh, well. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and start.
Okay.
I'm going to start my piece. Or I'm doing it first. I'm the one doing it first because I feel like it's a little dismal. But it's older. It's from the 70s. So, I am going to apologize ahead of time because I took 3 weeks of German in 7th grade. And that's my German background to be able to pronounce things. But also there are a lot of Jewish names. And I tried to find like YouTube stories on them. And I don't know who was pronouncing it right. So I gave up on that because they were pronouncing things different. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to apologize now for possibly mispronouncing words, but especially the Jewish names, because I have a thing about saying names right and getting people's names right. And so I hate when I'm going to butcher them. All right. I'm covering the 1972 Munich Olympics. And some people are like, why are we talking Olympics? And some people are like, oh, damn, I know that story. So,
well, the Olympics are about to start.
Yeah.
So this is, although by the time this airs, it will have started.
Where are they right now? Where are they this year?
Paris.
Okay. It was the summer of 1972. The Olympics were taking place in Munich, West Germany, because it was that time. The first time they had returned to Germany since 1936, when they had been held in Berlin, giving Hitler, who was Führer at the time, he was 2 years in, an excellent platform for his hateful propaganda. So it had really sullied Germany globally because of how things went down with those Olympics. Munich was invited so the world could see that things were different now. So this was very much a PR thing, yet they were invited to do this. So, because image was so important at that year's Summer Olympics, security was sketchy. The organizers wanted to show that the games were carefree. So even though they had asked a forensic psychologist named George Sieber to come up with various scenarios concerning possible terrorist attacks on the Olympics, with one of his scenarios involving significant foreshadowing of what would actually end up happening, they declined to take any actions to actually keep those scenarios from happening. So they asked him to do this. He got paid. He was an advisor. And then they were like, okay, cool. We're not going to do anything. They did not want visible security. And the security there was to be unarmed. Security funding was a mere $2 million. And their presence in Olympic Village, where the athletes were bunking, was non-existent. It needed to be made clear that they were not a police state. This was their goal. Look at this. We're not a police state. The military is not involved with the citizenry. The first week of they called it Die Heiteren Spiele, for the cheerful games. That's what that meant. Went without incident. In fact, it was 10 days in. But then on September 5th at 4:30 in the morning, 8 members of Black September, a subgroup of Fatah, a Palestinian military and political organization founded by Yasser Arafat, there's a name people might recognize, climbed a fence to get into Olympic Village. They had keys, which they let themselves into the building at 31 Connolly Strasse, where the Israeli athletes were staying, along with the Uruguayans. The Israelis had been out that evening watching Fiddler on the Roof, a live performance. They even got to have dinner with the star. They'd returned late and gone to bed in apartments 1 through 3. The Palestinians wore black tracksuits, so they were dressed like the athletes, and they had duffel bags in which they were carrying all their weapons. perhaps because of this clothing, they'd been actually helped over the chain link fence by some Canadian athletes who were also sneaking in, but they were sneaking back in because they were doing whatever athletes sneak out to do. And interestingly, it would be claimed that they were Americans for decades before it actually came out it was some Canadian athletes that let them in there because, heaven forbid we make Canadians look bad. Josef Gutfreund was one of the referees for the wrestling events. He heard some scratching at the door to where he and the other Israeli officials were staying, and that was apartment 1. He approached the front door where a masked intruder was trying to slip in. So they'd had masks in those bags too, because I don't think the Canadians would have helped them over if they were wearing or who knows? Maybe they were drunk. We don't know.
They were Canadian. Good bet that they were. Yeah, anyway.
We'll help you. Yelling, he threw himself against the door trying to keep them out, but there's more bodies on the outside than there are on the inside. And as he fought, a wrestling coach named Moshe Weinberg joined the fray while the weightlifting coach, Tuvia Sokolovsky, jumped out the first floor window to escape. One of the terrorists were able to shoot Weinberg through the cheek and take everyone hostage. They then took Weinberg at gunpoint to apartment 3, skipping number 2 because Weinberg told him those folks weren't Israeli. There are several theories as to why this happened. One is that they felt Weinberg may have thought that the athletes in apartment 3 would have a better chance of fighting off the terrorists as they were the weightlifters and wrestlers. Another theory is that it wasn't Weinberg telling them not to go, but the terrorists' knowledge that the sharpshooters were in apartment 2 and might be waiting for them with their weapons, though it appears they either didn't have their weapon or didn't think to use them. It was later shown they knew where everyone was, the terrorists. So I don't understand why they would have Weinberg lead them to the others. So I don't know. That story didn't make a lot of sense to me, and yet it was in all of the pieces.
Well, it does make sense to send one of...
I mean, they had him, perhaps they just wanted him as a hostage to be able to get in. And that makes more sense. Nobody said that, but...
Because that makes sense to me. You send one of their own people to open the door because they won't be alarmed if they see their coach at the door.
True, but they weren't knocking. They had keys.
Yeah.
So, whatever reason, the sound of the gunshot hadn't woken anyone in number 3. So when they entered the third apartment, they were able to take 6 more hostages because they were all fast asleep and they went in with the key. So they took these hostages back to their first apartment where Weinberg briefly fought back. He was able to knock one of the terrorists out and grab a knife, which he slashed at another with. Unfortunately, with no one else in a position to help him yet, Weinberg was shot again, and this time it was fatal.
Oh.
During the scuffle, a wrestler named Gad Subari was able to get away and make it out via the parking garage. One of the wrestlers, Yosef Romano, was also able to wound one of the terrorists, but failed to get the upper hand. Instead, he was shot and killed, and the terrorists took the time after they had everybody subdued to castrate him right there in front of everybody.
Oh, God.
The terrorists tied up their 9 hostages and put them in one of the rooms. Some of the hostages were injured from the fights that had occurred with various cuts, bruises, and broken bone. The hostages were Gutfreund, who had been the first to hear them coming in, 2 coaches, Kihat Shor, who was a coach in shooting, and Amitzer Shapira, who was track and field, Jakob Springer, a weightlifting judge, Andre Spitzer, the fencing master, and Zev Friedman and David Berger, who were both weightlifters. And interestingly, Berger was an American expat, and he had dual citizenship. And Mark Slavin and Eliezer Halfin, who were wrestlers. Slavin was only 18 years old and had just moved to Israel a few months before the Olympics. At the bound feet of the hostages, the terrorists threw Romano's castrated and brutalized body so they'd remember what might happen if they fought back. While those in apartment 3 hadn't heard any of the initial fight and the gunshot, those in apartment 2 had. Shaul Ladani, a Bergen-Belsen concentration camp survivor and race walker. So it was an event for speed walking.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that existed. And he jumped off the second floor balcony to get help from the Americans in their dorm. He was able to wake up one of the coaches. The fencers, shooters, doctors, and the guy who was in charge of stuff that had shared apartment 2 with him hid during the hostage taking. It was this action that made me think they didn't have their weapons in there, but also they're not fighters, they're not soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't the first thing they went to, or they were scared or whatever. So that might have been the risk. Seems like it really didn't matter. There were female Olympiads there from Israel as well, but the women were kept elsewhere, so they were therefore safe. With the call for help put out and others now aware that something had happened, hostage negotiations opened up. The Black September people gave their demands: liberations of over 200 Palestinians from Israeli prisons, as well as 2 Red Army faction prisoners in Germany. So Red Army faction was a West German group in fighting back. And of course, an airplane for their escape, because you always have to have the airplane or the chopper or the boat or the whatever.
Something. Bus.
To show how serious they were, they threw Weinberg's body out the front door. The Israeli government refused to negotiate with terrorists, as was their policy. They would not release any hostages. They would not discuss with them. They were out. That leaves West Germany to deal with it. Without this promise secured, the West German government panicked. They knew it would be insanely bad for Israeli citizens to be killed in Germany when this was supposed to be clearing up their past from the war, right? This was supposed to be making them look better. And here we are again with Jewish individuals in this dangerous situation being held captive. They offered to exchange high-ranking German citizens for the hostages. It was turned down. Then they offered massive amounts of money, to which the terrorists replied, quote, "Money means nothing to us. Our lives mean nothing to us," end quote. They did not want this. They wanted this thing. This is why they were doing it. They were doing this because of this long-standing war that had been occurring, right? As these negotiations were occurring, the International Olympic Committee, or IOC is what I will call it from now on, declared that the Olympic Games would go on as planned. Specifically, the chairman, Avery Brundage. This complicated things because the West German police were planning a rescue attempt using border police in which they dressed as Olympians, and they intended to sneak in through ventilation ducts, but belatedly realized that they were actually being watched on the live broadcast of the Olympics because the stupid press were recording what they were doing. The terrorists had been watching the entire thing and let negotiators know, finally, like they let them do it for a bit, and then they were like, yeah, cool. So we're going to kill 2 people if you continue with what we're watching on television right now. A couple officials they withdrew, obviously. A couple officials were allowed in to see the hostages and get proof that they were alive. So first they demanded, hey, let me talk to somebody on the phone. And they put on one of the Israeli folks who could speak German. And then they let these officials come in and visit. And these officials reported that the hostages were injured, but holding up with great dignity. Berger had been shot in the shoulder, so he was the only one it appeared who was alive and had been shot. The negotiators made an agreement with the terrorists. They were going to have to walk with their hostages through the underground parking garage to get out to choppers awaiting them. Police set up several snipers in the garage, but when 2 of the terrorists went ahead to check, and this is a thing that they would continue to do, by the way, they were not going to go walk into a trap. They were going to send 2 people and check it out first. They heard the movement from the cops because the cops kind of had to scuttle to get out of sight of them. And so they got heard anyway in this echoey, concrete, right? So instead they went back and they demanded a bus out front to take them around to the choppers. They then gathered up their already bound hostages, blindfolded them, and moved them onto the buses that took them to the choppers. I don't understand the point in blindfolding them, but anyway, this was at about 10 p.m. that night. So this had been going on nearly 20 hours.
Ugh.
With the hostages bound by their feet and ankles despite any injuries they had. The helicopters took them to Furstenfield Brook Air Base, where police had set up an ambush. Now, you may be thinking that because it was an air base, soldiers might be there ready to help police. But there's a lot of things that complicated the situation because of the timing, because of where it was. West Germany had created a new constitution after the war, in which it had been established that armed forces could not help in police actions by operating inside Germany in a time of peace. That was one of the things they'd established to come back from what had happened there. Sadly, though they'd made the stipulation, police had not received ample training that would have allowed them to properly handle things without the help of the military. So, they'd made this, but they hadn't followed through with training and arming and all of that stuff for the police. So, for example, there were no trained sharpshooters in the police. They had 0. There were no snipers, no people actually qualified to be snipers. So while they had positioned 5 officers to fill this role, they were both badly positioned and undertrained. Not only that, but they had no radios for communication. So each officer was basically told, all right, here's the plan, and then set out there with no way to communicate with each other afterwards. They didn't have sniper rifles, just regular assault rifles. It was dark out at this time, but they didn't have any sort of night vision. They didn't have any sort of scopes for distance. They were just woefully underprepared. They also lacked helmets, bulletproof vests, any sort of protective wear. In short, their entire setup was half-baked from the beginning. Finally, they had been misinformed of the number of terrorists by the officials who'd gone in to get that proof of life, who said there were only 5. There were 8. And they were outnumbered from the start. Typically, I read something and it said what they try and do in situations like this, it's preferred to have 2 snipers per like terrorist or whoever they're going to be going after. They want to have 2 per person that they're going after, so that you have multiple positions and you have more chances that you can get on a shot. There was a Boeing 727 waiting at the airbase. On it were 16 or 17 cops pretending to be flight crew. That's how it started, right? But as the choppers approached, the police officers freaked out, decided this was a suicide mission, and they abandoned the plane and left it empty. Yep. And better news, there were armored vehicles on their way. Yep. They bailed. They bailed, and it left just those 5 snipers as police to deal with the situation, period.
Wow.
Yeah. So, in better news, there were armored vehicles on their way. But I'm kidding, because there is no better news in this situation. They had been dispatched, but it had been done so late that they were just still on their way, and they got stuck in traffic. So I'm like, why is there traffic at like midnight? And then I was wondering when the games let out and stuff, and like, when were people coming back from this, or how far away were they, and when did they actually get sent? And the helicopters arrived at the airbase at about 10:30 p.m. They landed, but not in the position that had been agreed upon to begin with, meaning the snipers were now in the wrong places and could not communicate with each other. In fact, a couple of them were now set up with crossfire as a real risk. 2 of the terrorists got off and went to check out the plane. Like I said, this was their MO here, in which, of course, was completely empty, and they knew that they'd been screwed, right? There's not a crew to take them anywhere. No flight crew, no escape. They began yelling to alert the others, and with that yelling happening and them running back toward the choppers, the West German police started firing. Gunfire was exchanged, taking out 1 police officer up in a tower and multiple terrorists. The terrorists shot out lights that had been set up on the tarmac, and everyone stopped shooting in the dark. Like, there was an occasional shot if somebody thought they saw something moving, but this is where it all kind of separated. The helicopter crews during this were able to get to safety, leaving behind the hostages who had been tied to each other and had no way to get out of the choppers. Later, it would be shown that several of them had been working to get free. There were tooth marks on the ropes, for example, where they had been gnawing and trying to tear at them. ABC was giving updates, and at around midnight, a German official, whose name I couldn't find, made an official announcement stating that they had saved the hostages and killed all the terrorists.
Oh, good.
This was announced internationally, and it wasn't true.
Nope.
But at what point in history has the news cared what was true, right?
Yeah.
Like, come on. What actually happened at that point was that one of the terrorists, the leader, who was called Issa, shot the Israeli athletes aboard the first chopper, then chucked a grenade in to finish them off. And this is the part that made me, this poor guy went through so much shit. Dave Berger, the man who already had that gunshot wound in his shoulder, was shot twice in the leg during the initial shots. Then survived the grenade, only to die of smoke inhalation. When they did the autopsies later, he had died of smoke inhalation, not from the grenade.
Oh my God.
Not from the gunshots. Like,
that's awful.
Oh, yeah. And again, this was the American expat. A terrorist near the second chopper peppered it with gunfire, ensuring every single Israeli on board that one died as well. And that's about when the armored cars arrived. Yeah. And it was an absolute clusterfuck. The armored car folks had no idea what was going on. Because why? Because there were no radios. The lights were out. They had no idea what they had just arrived to, what had already happened. So they're freaked out, wondering what's happening. They are getting in position. And one of the terrorists at this point ran toward where one of the police snipers was hiding with one of the pilots who had run. But when the sniper shot the terrorist, he did take out the terrorist. That all they heard from the armored vehicles was the gunshot, and they started shooting in that direction, and they ended up shooting both the cop and the pilot. I will say they both survived, but they did get shot.
Shit.
Now only 3 terrorists remained alive, and they were quickly taken into custody, although one escaped and was caught somewhere else pretty quick, I think within a couple hours, ending the skirmish at 12:30 a.m. on September 6th with 11 Israeli athletes dead. At 3:24 a.m., a sportscaster named Jim McKay, who had been covering both the Olympics and then the hostage situation, soberly announced, quote, "When I was a kid, my father used to say, our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They're all gone." The council, which had not paused the Olympics during the hostage situation, I just want to be clear on that, the Olympics were ongoing that day.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point when it was clear it wasn't going to get cleared up, they stopped it. They then suspended the games for 24 hours in honor of those who had been murdered. The world was in a state of shock. Once more, Jewish blood had been spilled on German soil. Not reading the room, Avery Brundage, I just can't say his name enough, that same guy who had chosen not to suspend the games previously, used the murders to make a point where he somehow tried to compare what had happened to the Israeli athletes to the IOC barring what is now Zimbabwe, but was called Rhodesia at the time, from being in the Olympics due to Rhodesia's racist policies. They had actually said, all right, that's it. We can't let them participate because we can't condone. Well, he was against that. He was staunchly against barring them. And he felt it was an attack on Rhodesia that the Olympic Committee had banned them. So he used that, what had been done to them, as a comparison to what had just happened to the Israelis. And by the way, this happened in a memorial that I'll talk about in a minute. That's when he chose to do this. It did not go well for him in the court of public opinion, especially combined with him not stopping the Olympics while some of the Olympians were being held hostage. The West German federal government completed an investigation into the whole situation and declared it as unavoidable. They couldn't have done anything to stop it, and they cleared themselves and police of all fault. This was despite not only having been warned by the expert Sieber. He specifically said that Palestinians launching an attack was highly likely to occur, among his other possible terrorist risks, which included an attack by the Irish Republican Army, the ETA, which was a Basque terrorist organization at the time, and the Red Army faction, which was a West Germany terrorist, I keep saying it, organization, and who you might recall had 2 people in the Black September program asked to be freed along with their fellow Palestinians. And I will say I decided not to pursue this because it was a lot of conspiracy type stuff, but there would be evidence, and there's a lot of discussion that the West Germany terrorists were involved in all of this, like help with the planning and making sure it could happen. The real kicker is he had looked at the Olympic Village setup and had specifically said, this was what was written by him, the Palestinians were likely to climb the fence into the Olympic Village. He felt it would be around 5 a.m. He was half an hour off from what actually happened, that they would take the Israelis hostage, and after killing a couple of them, would use them to barter for the release of Palestinians and a plane. This was all in his warnings that he did ahead of time. But remember, doing anything about that would have detracted from the Cheerful Games moniker and the intent to show the world that Germany was no longer a threat. For his efforts, by the way, Sieber was fired within a few hours of the cessation of the hostage situation in what would be a thorough attempt at the West Germany government covering up their ineptness. What I also haven't mentioned is that the Israeli delegation head, Shmuel Lalkin, had arrived at Olympic Village before the start of everything and gone to the authorities with concerns that there was insufficient security and that the location of his team's apartments was in an isolated part of Olympic Village with easy access from the outside, thus putting them at increased risk of violence. They had assured him they'd provide additional security for the Israelis, then they had done no such thing. Basically, it was all fenced in, and there was a security guard post, and that was it. That was it. Israel had offered to send special forces to help with security and protection efforts, but were turned down. But it gets even better. In 2012, it was revealed by Der Spiegel, a news periodical in Germany, that a Palestinian informant in Beirut had notified West German officials that Palestinians were planning an attack at the Olympics. That was 3 weeks before the start of the Olympics. The foreign ministry took this very seriously, and they notified the Munich Secret Service, saying they should take, quote, all possible security measures. But no action was taken in response to this. All of this was covered up for decades, by the way. This was all started leaking out about 2012 and after. As a result of the complete lack of preparedness to deal with something of this caliber, a police counterterrorism branch called GSG-9 was formed within a few months of these murders. On September 8th, the Israeli government had their military bomb 10 Palestinian Liberation Organization bases located in Lebanon and Syria. While 200 PLO militants were killed, there were also 11 civilians killed. They also launched a mission called Operation Wrath of God with Mossad and IDF to go after a list of targets who had been involved with the Munich actions. This mission would go on for 20 years, with more civilian deaths during other actions and many PLO deaths. So this has just had decades of impact. During a memorial held by the IOC, Weinberg's cousin died of a heart attack at the ceremony.
Oh, God.
So there was one more person gone because of it. It is also at this memorial that Brundage made those problematic statements I mentioned before. And he got in a lot of trouble because he basically even addressed the Israeli victims or talked about them at all at a memorial for them. He actually was talking about how great the Olympics were and how it was important to keep the Olympics going and keep those relationships going and all that
Covering
stuff.
his ass.
He was very political, very much CYA. Before the remaining terrorists went to trial, others in the organization hijacked Lufthansa Flight 615. Negotiations required the freeing of the Munich terrorists, which was immediately fulfilled by the West German government. Nobody ever even spoke to the Israelis. There was nobody requesting anything from them. They were free to return home as heroes, and they were welcomed as heroes. And the bodies that were sent back of those that had been killed, of course, got heroes' burials or ceremonies. The Olympic Games continued, but many of the athletes pulled out, some in solidarity, quite a few in solidarity, some, such as the Egyptians, out of fear of reprisals, because when the terrorists had asked for the plane, their intent was to fly to Cairo. Of those that remained, many would say their hearts were not in it after the brutality that had occurred. All remaining Israelis, as well as a Jewish competitor from the U.S., left under heavy guard. It had been discovered that the involved Black September operatives had been staffed within the Olympic Village leading up to the attack. That's how they had keys. That's how they knew where everybody was. One of the Uruguayan participants had reported finding one of these guys in there, but it was staff. So they were like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't matter. They were just in there looking around because they had something they had to do. The IOC has since refused to allow a permanent memorial. They did, saying it would alienate other members of the Olympic Committee. That's a quote. They also refused to allow a moment of silence on the 40th anniversary of the massacre, saying it would be inappropriate, despite a memoriam honoring the victims of the 2005 London bombings at that same ceremony. They did come around in 2014 and donate money toward a memorial, as well as commemorating the victims in 2016 in Rio. That's the first time, 1972 to 2016. That's when they had this. Yeah.
That makes no sense.
There are now memorials around the Munich Stadium and Olympic Village. And in 2020, a moment of silence was held during the opening ceremony. They had never held a moment of silence in the opening ceremonies before. So, but they've been very, very distant from all of this throughout, you know? In 2004, the relatives of the Munich victims won against the German government in court. 2004. Like, all of this took so long and received cash settlements because it was able to be proven at that point that the government had done nothing. Nobody had done anything to stop this, and they'd had so many warnings. Mm-hmm. This was not the first or last aggressive action during the Olympics. In fact, somewhere in Mexico, I think, were the ones previous to Munich, and there had been a bunch of students killed by the government there, so that had gotten very ugly. And of course, in 1996, we have the Atlanta bombing, right? But security has vastly improved since Munich because of Munich, and that's what has kept other aggressions at bay and stopped things. The Munich Summer Olympics marked the first time a terrorist action was broadcast internationally live. This would lead to an explosion of international terrorist groups from 11 at that time to 50 in just a matter of years, encouraged by the amount of attention Black September have gotten and forever changing the face of global terrorism. It completely changed everything, how they did things, because now you could be a very small group of people and have a lot of power.
Have a lot of impact.
Yes. So my sources were Wikipedia, Britannica, Olympics.com, NPR, and New York Times. And I fell down such a hole that I did. first of all this is vastly simplified because, of course, there was a ton of politics and history involved in this.
Mhm.
I'm not taking, I am not taking any sides or picking anything here. That's why I address kind of things on both sides. But yeah, this was gross. The Olympics are supposed to be safe. They're supposed to be a coming together of the countries, and so using them as a place to get at people is just sucks. But the mismanagement, man, like, it did not do what they intended it to do for West Germany there for a while.
No, and it sounds like the officials just covered their eyes and said, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. La, 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 I can't hear you. Fingers in the ears. And
yeah, it's crazy to me to have these warnings, but also like actually pay somebody to come on this advisory panel and say what could happen and then go, great. I'm so glad that you put together this list of 26 possibilities that are risks here, and we're not actually going to do anything about that. So cool. I'm glad we had this talk.
It's crazy. I wonder if the adrenaline, the 24-hour coverage, I mean, it wasn't even 24 hours.
Right.
Helped foster or foment the onset of 24-hour news, because there's something about, headline news and 24-hour news where you have a station that's broadcasting news constantly all the time. When I was a kid, you only got 1 hour a day.
Yeah.
And that was the FCC minimum. In exchange for using these airwaves for free, you must dedicate an hour a day for public service. And so they use that to do news.
Interesting. Okay.
Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it changed a lot of things. And it's just like, I seem to recall that, for example, Vietnam, about a decade earlier, was the first that warfare had been, people had been able to see footage actively during a war, right? On news stories about that. There was a lot of change in these decades involving what people could see, what we could actively almost participate in and worry about. Now, of course, look where we are. It's inundation 24 hours a day, and you can't escape it even if you want to. And I think a lot of us want to, but yeah, this was, the press has not gotten any better about not showing, say, police actions in the middle of a hostage situation, or just stupid things like that.
The public has a right to know.
Not one of them thought, gosh, maybe this could backfire on this team here. And then, of course, and because I can't even fault the police for not realizing that it was being broadcast, because again, this is the first time they are in this situation. And I read these stories from people who were like in the not the press room, I guess it's kind of the press room, but where they have the monitors of the different events going on, because they're covering all of them at the same time. And they said they had 10 monitors, I think it was. 3 of them during the day were showing stuff from the hostage situation, and 7 of them were showing various events. And they said it was so surreal watching these things in that room, being stuck in that room, watching these things all at the same time and determining what to put on at any given time. Wow. Like, there's so many stories coming out. If there's books about this, I think it would be very interesting to read. But there could be so many books, and they wouldn't be able to cover the dynamics that were happening in this story and in this location and everything at the time. What was his name? I fell down a hole, and I went and I read separately about the guy who had survived Bergen-Belsen. And I have to say that his story was very interesting, if anybody ever wanted to look at that, because he was 8 when he ended up at Bergen-Belsen, and he lost family members in Auschwitz, his grandparents and some other relatives. But they kept moving to places they thought were safe, like they knew that this was coming down them, and his father was able to move them and get like jobs in these different places, but they kept moving, and then like something would go terribly wrong. Right. And then the Nazis would get there. And so there was nowhere safe in Europe really at the time, but you'd go to where you thought it was safe, and then boom, they got taken. And actually they were on a train where they'd been promised they were being taken somewhere safe. And instead it took them to Bergen-Belsen. So like, he's just a very interesting guy. But if you go to the Olympics, they have, of course, the 1972, they have pages for everything. So there was a bunch of information out there that was interesting. But yeah, so there you go. I feel like that one's the more sobering.
That was really great.
We can move on from that one. Because it's
No, I
kind of
thought you distilled all of the research you did down into what you just read, and I thought I was riveted. I was what, and then what, and then what? That was great.
Because yeah, man, I fell down so many rabbit holes. Because again, there's just the dynamics to this were crazy. When we're talking about hundreds of years of war, we're talking, you know, that, and this is just one little skirmish in that, really.
Yeah.
And of course, we're seeing that all happening still. And honestly, the way it's still just as problematic, and there are just as many people that get harmed by everyone involved in it, right? Innocent civilians that are getting killed in this still. So, because I mean, these athletes weren't government people. They weren't, you know. So anyway, we're gonna talk now. We're gonna chat about like cryptids and stuff like that.
Yes.
Which here you go. Only if people watch the video will you be able to see. Look what I got in Oregon. Aww. It's a little Sasquatch Stuffy. He's so cute.
He is very cute.
Because I think the only place that has more Bigfoot and Sasquatch stuff than Colorado is Oregon. It's a big thing that I grew up with. That was a big thing. Like they even have, I didn't see this until it was too late to go see it. They actually have like a Bigfoot science center in Oregon for the study of. And I was like, I want to go there.
Hair, DNA, number of chromosomes. You know, can you see where on the primate tree that these landed? Are they extra primate and not from? I'm a science guy, but it's not stopping me from, you know, loving the concept of it. Right.
Right. That's the thing. Like, I don't know how many people really, really believe in all these things, but I think we want to believe in these things.
There are flat earth people out there who are fervent about their belief. But I think if you hold them, you know, in a dark room with lots of coils of rope around and you waterboard them a couple times, they'll admit that no, the world is round.
Yeah. It's like a defiant child.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to say this, even though we have so much that show. They're like, really? I'm looking this way and it's not curving in my vision. I'm like, but have you ever been on a plane?
Yeah. That's the windows. That's NASA fooling America. No, it's funny. It's because they claim to have representatives all around the world.
Oh, the terminology. Totally.
And they don't breathe from the atmosphere flat, do they? They breathe from the atmosphere.
Sphere.
That's true.
What?
Because of course NASA didn't happen, so you can't even use that as proof. Those are fake pictures.
No, it's all fake.
There's a movie out now about that.
There's always a lot of fun memes about the flat earth, like the one where they're like, oh, this is awkward, and it has all the planets. They're circles.
Round, flat.
Right, and it's flat right here. Or the cat. Well, if it was flat, cats would have knocked everything off of the edge by now.
I like the one where they convinced the flat earther that the earth was round because they said if the earth was flat, there would be so much commerce set up at the edge and people would be taking advantage of that.
Right.
And they could believe in greed. They couldn't believe in science, but that was what changed it for them. They could believe the greed. Yes, if it was flat, we would be making money off of it somehow.
Right. Like, if it's flat, how come you haven't found the edge yet? Why aren't we taking tourist trips out to the edge?
Why are there no pictures? No pictures of the edge.
Well, there's a big ice wall that holds all the air in. So the ice wall holds the air in. The irony of the flat earth structure is that gravity is down. Even outside of, once you're outside, things would fall because of gravity beneath our flat planet.
Right.
But nothing else can succumb to that gravity. We can see the moon, and it's not succumbing to that gravity. It's all craziness. It's all it's all fun craziness because it's fun to challenge the status quo.
It is, and it doesn't. Honestly, of all the things out there, this one harms nobody. You know, so it's be what you want to be. Like in terms of, oh my gosh, what is it called? Oh no, there's a movie. What is the movie of a genie where they think now see, I'm getting confused. There's Sinbad and there's Shaq. And one of them made a genie movie, and people are adamant that they saw that the other one made a genie movie. Mm-hmm. Shazam, and I forget what the other one.
I know what you're talking about. They swear up and down that it was
that they have pulled that. Was it Shaq was rich enough? Nope, it wasn't Shaq.
Sinbad.
Sinbad was rich enough to have them pull it because he was embarrassed or whatever. Because
you're talking about the Mandela Effect.
That's it. That's what I wanted to talk about, because for some reason a bunch of those started popping up on my feed recently about the Mandela Effect, and I am absolutely fascinated reading the comments of the people who truly adamantly are like, nope, it was not that one that I saw. It was the one with Sinbad or whatever. And just they're like, there are fake covers that have been created that people will share. And since Sinbad is a stand-up comedian, he made a fake thing of him as the genie, and so they keep sharing that as the real thing. And now he did have a movie come out the same summer where he was like guarding the child of the president or something like that, and I think that's part of why all this happened, right? But man, the logic that they use to justify, no, I saw it, and you will never convince me that it didn't exist and that they haven't just scoured the country and removed all evidence of it existing.
People believe they remember it correctly. It doesn't matter what proof you give them.
Yeah.
They remember it. I had an argument with someone about Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark, where he reaches into the audience and pulls the girl up on
Courtney
stage.
Cox?
It was Courtney. Nobody knew who she was back then.
Right.
But it was Courtney Cox. And I said something about, oh yeah, that was what's her name? And the person said, Marissa Tomei. And I looked at her and I said, no, it was not. It was Courtney Cox. And we argued about it until I pulled up the video on my phone and held it up and said, who dat? It's not Marissa Tomei. And they were like, are you sure this is the only video? I mean, it was that. So now if I'm talking to somebody about something that happened in the past, like if I was talking to you about the trip to Idaho, and I remembered something one way and you remembered it differently, now I'm likely to go, you know what? You're probably right.
Like what?
It's probably some average of the two memories is actually correct.
Yeah.
Because you don't remember things correctly.
Well, that's why eyewitness statements are great.
Yes.
Neuroscientists say we don't actually remember memories. We remember the memory of memories.
I've actually heard something along those lines.
It's a layer of obfuscation. Like people can be abused and traumatized as children and have no recollection of it.
Right.
And then other people can swear there was a whole conversation. You said this, I said this. And you go back and look at the recording, if there is one, and the person says, that has to be fake because I remember it so vividly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, just watching. The human brain is amazing, of course, but
it's a glass darkly through which we see.
Yeah. Well, then here's the question, though. That different, say, neurodivergent and neurotypical brains, do neurodivergents remember things differently than neurotypical brains?
I guarantee it, because we think differently.
Right. So that would be an interesting thing to look into.
Whose memory is more accurate?
Oh, wait. My argument would be neurodivergents tend to be more logical in their approaches to things and let the emotion impact it less in some ways. So I would argue that theirs would be more accurate.
Neurodivergent folks see more. They see more. They're paying attention to things that neurotypical folks don't. And I hate the differentiation of neurotypical and neurodivergent because the implication of divergent rests on our base human emotion of the other is an enemy. The other is an enemy. And divergent means the other. It means diverse. It means, breaking away from. And that's not fair. We're actually parallel.
Right. But there's proof that we've been around a long time.
I had a theory, and I've done a modicum of research, that Neanderthals, who 400,000 years ago had culture, family, they didn't have writing that we can see, but they cared for each other. They nurtured one another. They planted seeds. They grew things. And along comes Cro-Magnon or whomever, and integrates with them for a while. people have Neanderthal DNA in them.
Uh-huh.
And then the Neanderthals were all genocided away, all of them. And a fun theory, just for fodder for writing stories, is were the Neanderthals all neurodivergent, and that their DNA carries forth at various levels on the spectrum of neurodiversity, or the way that our brains work versus neurotypical brains. And in a neurotypical environment where the very pretty people, the Cro-Magnons, were very pretty, right? And Neanderthals, not so pretty, thicker bones and coarser features, that sort of thing. But it wouldn't be fun if the very pretty people were just no good at survival. They were pretty, but they couldn't survive. The Neanderthals brought them in, put furs on their back, showed them how to plant seeds, gave them family, gave them structure. And then eventually the pretty people were like, but they're so ugly. And then just killed them all. And then took what the Neanderthals had invented 400,000 years ago and have survived since. And that's why humanity is so broken. We have nationalism, we have political differences, we isolate ourselves in countries, and we work really hard within those countries to have a monoculture. And anybody whose culture is different, we as a species don't have the empathy to not murder other people. We can create genocide because we have that kind of filtered out. And what if the Neanderthals...
We make somebody else less than human to ourselves. I mean, that's what happens in warfare.
What if the Neanderthals couldn't fathom genocide, couldn't understand how anybody could do it? It was so foreign a thing. That's why they invited these people in who were ultimately going to be their murderers.
Have you heard the song One Tin Soldier?
Yeah.
Yeah. From
Peace on Earth was all it said.
Yeah, like that song. I get goosebumps every single. I have that on in my songs and everything like that. Goosebumps every single time it plays. It's such a good song, and I've had such an urge lately to just post that video over and over and over again and make people listen to the freaking song. And I'm like, do you understand, like how? But yeah, I've been reading a lot of what is it, Quora. I had. When my daughter was going through her diagnosis and her shutdown and everything like that with autism, I had joined these groups to kind of get notifications about all these topics. And I'm always on the verge of just trying to remove that from there, because the number of offensive questions about autism that come through are just overwhelming some days. But there's a lot of questions about, well, why can't neurodivergents just act like everybody else? Why can't they just do what everybody else does? And it's just constantly this question of that, but it's in the answers that I find interesting that I keep around, of course, because then it's the autistic folks responding to this and being like, do you understand that you people are completely illogical and we can't fathom that, and we can't just make ourselves be illogical to fit in with you?
It doesn't make sense.
We can't. We're just looking in. But no, like your theory, that aren't we still doing all that stuff? Aren't we still putting the pretty people up on the pedestal, and they can do no wrong? And it's not just the pretty people, it's the rich people and the people that can get people with charisma that can get that attention.
In a neurodivergent society where neurodivergent people were the majority, and I'm not saying better, it's not worse. Both kinds of brains are necessary for a society to function.
Right.
I hold strongly to that. It's when you isolate and you other one of those groups that things go wonky. But in a neurodivergent society, who are the most important people to us? I would say it's teachers. I would say teachers would be the most elite career you could get. And here we are in a neurotypical society where athletes and movie stars make the most money, and teachers are at the very bottom of the pay scale, which is such a lack of empathy, because it takes empathy to recognize the value of a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of our libraries are closing down in Colorado Springs right now, including the one nearest me that I've been going to since I was a kid.
Is it decided? I thought it was still up for...
If something doesn't pass on the ballot, they're gone. So it'll be Rockrimmon and Ruth Holly, and I think one other one, and I don't remember what it was.
Is this because CRT?
They're saying that they don't have the tax dollars. That's all I know, is that they're claiming they don't have the tax dollars. And yet in this same plan that involves closing some of these locations, they have plans to open a new library on Powers. And so I'm wondering if they're not trying to open a giant behemoth like Library 21C at the north of the city. That was the tech library on Powers. And so they're using this to get the money. But the ones they're closing down are rented instead of owned.
Okay.
And so their argument is that they'll eventually reopen them, but in a building that they own. Mm-hmm. But as the argument is in the comments, people believe that once it shuts down, they're not going to give them back to us. And Ruth Holly especially is in a poorer area here in the Springs. So we're now taking away a library that people probably use the computers to get jobs, to do their jobs sometimes, right? That children are using to get their research. Children who are too poor to have any sort of internet at home are using them. They can walk to that library. Now they will not have that anymore. But anyway, that's not even the point I was trying to make, but I'm frustrated about the whole thing. But in the comments were people coming in and saying there's no place for libraries. They've done their time, that they should have been gone long time ago. And I don't want to turn this political. I will say one of the big comments in there was, of course, only liberals believe in libraries. And I will say, because again, I don't want this split, and it's not political for most of us. There were a lot of conservatives that responded in there and said, well, that's bullshit, and you know it. There were a lot of conservative moms who's piped up and said, I homeschool and I take my kids to the library all the time. It's an incredibly valuable place. And no, it is not just liberals who want to keep it around. But like watching that whole argument, and I'm like, really? There are people who believe we don't have a use for libraries? Like, to me, that was mind blowing.
But they will keep pouring money into what's the downtown Penrose.
Yeah,
they will just keep pouring money into Penrose, which it's underutilized. It's not being used the way it used to be, but they will keep renovating it and updating it. And
what's Penrose?
It's just the downtown library, and it's a neat historical building. It is. I believe that they still have the archives at this library. They have like some very delicate books that you have to sign in to go in and have rules to handle. So that's cool. But yeah, somebody brought up too, when there were people arguing like, why don't you guys shut down the money pit that is the downtown one and let that historical building be used for something else, and not shut down these in areas where, in general, the Rock Rimmon Library has kind of a mix financially, but there are a lot of people lower income in this area as well, so they're both taking away from low income folks. But yeah, I can still be surprised is my point. I can still be surprised, because to me, I am stunned that anybody thinks that a library doesn't hold value, especially as they have tried to update as time goes and be useful in different ways. That's what Library 21C is, our tech library that has a lot more exposure to that stuff. And kids can go and take coding and just free go and participate and learn coding. And they have a 3D printer, and they have all these neat, my kids went in and did this thing where they could put these circuits together on this board and ultimately be able to push a button and turn on a light bulb, right? Like, they have all these great science things there now that are valuable for kids, free programs. So yeah,
they have 3D printers that you could go in and use, but they also have, which I think is amazing, sewing machines.
Yeah.
That you can just go in and sign up to use.
Right. So yeah, I feel like they've tried to keep up and change. Maybe they haven't changed with the times as much as they could have, but at the same time, there is a base purpose there that can't change. Right. But anyway, that's again, sidetrack, but
Yetis.
Totally illogical.
We went from Yetis to libraries.
You're right. But yeah, I did not see any real Yetis in Oregon, because they don't live there. They live in the in Asia.
Yes.
But yeah, they're I would love to see a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I hear they smell.
Well, for sure. They have olfactory senses just like the rest of us. So
That's why they're called skunk ape, because they stink.
The Yeti, the word Yeti, apparently means the wild men. And so, you know about my Serpent on the Loch story of the cryptid with Nessie in Scotland and all. So I'm thinking of writing a sequel, and I've already commissioned the artwork for the cover through somebody very famous, a famous artist who I've always wanted to have one of his works. And it's called The Wild Men of Everest. And our two intrepid heroes take steamer and a tramp steamer over to India, and then there's no train that takes you to Nepal. You have to go overland. And so they say that travel isn't story. So I have to come up with ways to make travel story, because the first third of the book is getting there.
Oh,
yeah. But I'm positing that, and I did the research. In Everest has caves on the Chinese side, but not on the Nepalese side. And I posit that actually Everest does have caves, but the Sherpa and the folks that curate that area of the world for the high-paying tourists that come and die on the slopes protect those caves, because within them are families and a whole society of Yeti. So
how can there not be caves? Is the argument that because it's like colder and like covered in ice and snow that it can't?
No. This is just, if you look it up, the science says there are caves on the Chinese side. There are not caves on the Nepalese side. I'm thinking, as an author, you want to take the facts, and you remember the best lies are the ones that contain mostly truth. So yes, my hypothesis for the purpose of the story would be there actually are caves, and they're kept secret, and here's why.
All right. I'm fascinated by the fact that there aren't caves.
Yeah.
But also, yes, that's exactly how I write stories, right, too. So, Oh, what? You said that this isn't that? Well, let me tell you why this isn't.
Don't tell anyone, but yeah.
That's right.
And the Sherpa guard them jealously because they're a very gentle species of creature.
I have to wonder if in our heads there are more caves in existence than actually exist anywhere, kind of like quicksand. Although I'm enjoying that there was a news story that a woman actually got caught in quicksand. So I hope she was Gen X, because we were trained for quicksand. Yes. We all knew you stop moving. You can't move when you're in the quicksand. You'll sink faster. Like, we knew the rules, and we never found quicksand. So I was very excited.
Because everything we watched as kids was always in the cartoons and whatever. Quicksand, what?
It was like the worst thing that could happen to you.
And I never had a large van pull up and have a stranger offer me candy or drugs.
Fun fact, I was stalked by a large van for about a year and a half when I was in 8th grade, and then my freshman year of high school. So I did actually have the van, but the guy who tried to get me into his car when I wouldn't get into his car, tried to crawl out through the passenger side to grab me, was just in some sort of like little green Honda or something like that. So that was not a van, but I have dealt with the big van. He never tried to get me, though. He would just follow me. He would wait. I walked home from middle school, and I had this path, and I would come out on that path. And this being Colorado, it wasn't just a grassy field in any way. You wouldn't walk through a grassy field because we had rattlesnakes. I had to pass them on the sidewalk. So I had to take the path, is what I'm saying here. Like, this wasn't I didn't do anything to try and fix my problem, but I had no choice. So it was like all sorts of prickly things and rattlesnakes and shit. So path it was. And he would wait for me. He would be parked there. I would come out, and I would stare him down as I got over to near the houses. And he would just slowly follow me all the way home. He would watch me go in my door, and he would sit there a moment, then take off. And then the next year I thought I was free of him because I had switched to high school and my bus was on the opposite side, but he found me. And one day there he was again in his van, and he just waited there, and I got off the bus, and he followed me. And then one day I lost my shit because I'd been dealing with him for a while, and I got in my yard and threw down my backpack and picked up rocks and started chucking them at the van, and I never saw him again.
Good.
So I have dealt with the van. I have.
but he didn't offer you candy or drugs.
He did not offer me candy. Yeah.
Was there a dog in the van?
Okay, but drugs, I've been offered a shit ton. I was offered drugs last week.
Yeah.
By strangers?
No,
see?
Oh, I've been offered drugs from strangers, and I was too smart to take them, though. I went to a huge kegger that happened annually. It's this big mystery pop-up in Texas when I was 16 years old. I went down to visit a friend. She was like, "You're here." And we got these flyers for Kinderstock. He changed the name every year, but his last name was Kinder. And he would rent a farm somewhere out there outside Plano in Dallas. And he would throw a massive kegger, and everybody would show up. Nobody knew him. Nobody knew what he looked like. We don't know if he was there. And there would be kegs. And people, of course, they brought 6-packs, and they brought drugs, and I got offered every single kind of thing, including more beer and liquor and all of that from lots of strangers. I got offered. Do I look like what? Why have I been offered so many? It's because they were trying to get in my pants.
Well, I was going to say
always men.
It was a party setting, and yes, that's what.
Well, in life in general, outside of Kinder stock, I was also frequently offered. Hey,
which brings up me too.
Yeah. I have this pot. Do you want to come over? And no, I do not, sir.
I made the comment the other day to someone. I said, back in the day, I said, women really didn't have to ever buy pot.
I've never, ever. I put in $2 for one time with my friends. And other than that, it was always free.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also rarely paid for cigarettes because I would just go around and bum a bunch and I'd leave with a pack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see you doing that.
It's terrible. I know it's terrible.
It's like that Johnny Cash song where he talks about building a car from parts from multiple
years.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that song.
Your pack would have like a Virginia Slim, and it would have a Marlboro Red, and it would have a Tarryton. Do you remember Tarryton?
Oh God.
I'd walk a mile for a Camel. Walk a mile for a Tarryton. Which one was the one that had a black eye, but it was never black? It was always white. Like, you had to fight. You fight for a Tarryton. I think that's what it was.
That might have been. I can't remember. Then there were Pall Malls.
Mm-hmm.
I remember.
Don't forget Virginia Slims with thin ladies.
Yes,
my grandma smoked Virginia Slims. I never actually saw this grandma smoke. She had quit by then, but there were always pictures of her smoking with her beehive.
Yep.
And but you got rewards or whatever from all the cigarette companies, right?
You could
she had all these decks of cards and stuff from Virginia Slims and things like that she still just kind of had around the house.
Well, remember how much trouble the cigarette companies got into with Joe Camel?
Yep.
Because there was all the merch that had Joe Camel all over it, and it was
which
really
is a cartoon animal, basically
targeted at children. And then somebody finally went, "Hey,
we can't
we can't market we could sell them to children, but we can't market them to children."
Yeah, I do remember that, and I did smoke Camels. My friends smoked Marlboro Reds.
Did you walk a mile for a Camel? Would you walk a mile?
I never did walk one. Well, I might have. Just kidding. No, I never did.
Because you could bum one off from somebody. They walk the mile. You say, "Hey, can I get one of those?"
That's
yes.
Right. That's it. Admittedly, I was pretty as a teenager, and I exploited that. But you know what? You have very little other power as a teenage girl, and you exploit what you've got.
Yep.
But yeah.
You bat your eyes, whatever.
That's right.
There's that brief period of time in which young women, have all the power they'll have in their lives in a patriarchal environment from, I'm going to say 12 until 30. And then after 30, it's even Hollywood at the time was just discarding women after 30 because they didn't fulfill that nubility, Nubility, nubilism, nubile, which I think basically means fuckable. I think that's what the definition is.
Yeah. And now the incels say they've hit the wall. I somehow got a bunch of stuff on my page, and now I know how incels speak. But they call it hitting the wall, and it's about, they differ on when you hit the wall, whether that's 25 or 30, but it is definitely not over 30 ever. So women are no longer fuckable and therefore not worthwhile, and they shouldn't exist.
That's something the Neanderthals never would have done, because they had empathy and they cared about all people who were human beings, regardless of their equipment, regardless of.
Have value.
Well, there was that great skit it had Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and
yes.
And they were, and she was like, "I'm past my fuck by date."
They did that game show
and wearing whatever they wanted.
Moo-moos, caftans, moo-moo/caftans. That's what you get to be like. Ha ha! It doesn't matter.
I am proud of my moo-moo. Actually, I've worn my moo-moo here to record before because I have
bought my first caftan, and it is spectacular.
Right?
There's a game show they did, Meet Your Second Wife. And one of them has this very attractive young woman who is a college student. And then one of the guys was like, "Oh, hey, that's not bad," and then the woman said, "Oh, it's not me. It's my soon-to-be-born daughter."
Yes, I saw that. It was so gross.
I
I mean, it was
That
funny
was-
as hell,
I
but it was gross.
Yeah.
It was. I
Because-
think it was pitched by one of the women. I think it was Tina Fey or somebody like.
Yeah, and they kept bringing it because the first woman, Meet Your Second Wife, was younger, but it wasn't grossly. But they
She
just
wasn't 12.
they kept getting younger and younger
Yes.
and younger.
Yes.
Ugh.
Yes.
So it was about Leonardo DiCaprio. Then. What is his top age? 25? Is
Ugh.
that the joke?
I don't know, but I know Tom Cruise marries them when they're 33, divorces them when they're 33. Or yeah, that's it. Once they're 33, he gets rid of them. So he's had 3 wives, and all of them he divorced when the wives were 33. And he, however, has progressively aged, but 33 and then later 33 and then later. That's weird. I joined Sisters in Crime recently, which is a writing group.
Oh yay!
I'm very
Have
happy.
you been going to they're just too early in the morning for me to drive up to Parker for, because I actually really like Sisters in Crime.
Mhm.
I love Sisters in Crime. I just went to their quarterly meeting. I'm not yet cognizant of that they have meetings to drive over to.
Oh, got yous. They have, is it once a month?
Is it write-ins? Is it
No, they have 2 speakers that come. They have a speaker.
No, that's their quarterly.
That's the quarterly. Okay, yeah. So you
I
went
did
to that.
That was in Lone Tree. I went to it was
Oh, yeah,
last
Lone
month,
Tree.
I think. And I got to meet all sorts of great folks because I'm writing a cozy mystery and my main character is a woman, just like most of my main characters have been since Me Too came out.
Oh, yeah. I like how you tried to Last of Us back to Neanderthals.
To Neanderthals.
And then but we did it.
That's called a callback in comedy.
Oh, yeah.
yes.
The Neanderthals would never treat women like that.
All right. Well, see, we didn't even have to talk about Nessie at all, really. And now is as good a time as any to transfer over and let Emby tell her story.
Oh God,
I love it.
This is a bunch of rabbit holes sewn together.
Well, did we not just go down like 500 rabbit holes that had nothing to do with anything?
Yes. And I almost cried yesterday. I told you this earlier. So I'm researching this and it's very hard because I just found this person who I'm actually going to talk about. I found him kind of interesting. So I'm trying to get a timeline. And this drives me fucking bananas so often with whatever I'm researching. Because I mean, it's usually a person or an event, and I'm trying to get the timeline. What led up to it? What was there? Where were they born? What year were they born? How did all this come together? And this one was just everything I looked at was all over the place. No one has really stitched his story together from point A to point B. Although I will have a point at the very end about his story, which I think is kind of funny. So anyway, this is, first of all, we're going to blame Patrick Hester. Oh, so
as we do, as we should.
As we do, as we do.
We do blame him for a lot of things.
Oh.
Anyway, I have this mild obsession with Georgia going on right now, and it's because of the Karen Slaughter books.
I was like, what is that off? He's not from Georgia.
He is not. He's from Kentucky, sort of, not really.
But it's because he put you onto the Karen Slaughter books.
Yes, he got me reading the Karen Slaughter's Will Trent books, which are set in Georgia. The main character is a GBI agent. So, I mean, the TV show is one thing, and it's good. I like it, but oh my God, the books are so disturbing and so engrossing. I finally read one that I got to the end and I threw the book across the room and I was like, I do not like that ending. Now it worked. It was actually probably very accurate to what would happen in real life.
Okay.
What happened in that particular book was I felt the bad guys didn't get what they deserved in the end. They walked.
Yeah, that's deeply dissatisfying.
But it was realistic.
Yeah, but we don't read fiction.
That's true.
Without satisfaction,
Except
for horror, which we know that we may leave without satisfaction.
So, of course, when I get fixated on a place like good old Muncie, I thought, what happened in Georgia for real? You know, they've got to have tons of
the really reals of Georgia.
Yeah, they got to have tons of shit. This is the state I was driving through when I saw the sign for Taint's Biker Bar.
Oh,
the sign is nailed to a tree, which is outside this very disreputable looking single wide trailer. And I did not stop. It was closed at that moment. It was like a Sunday morning, but we did look it up later and discovered it was permanently closed. But I'm like, Tate Spiker Bar.
No. I can be amused by the name and still not want to go to the joint. No, thank you.
I was not
this is a clear sign, right? But we don't need to go here.
So I'm.
Oh my God, it's real. It's in South Carolina.
Was it? No, I swear this was in Georgia.
Augusta.
Oh,
Highway.
no. Maybe we had crossed the border into South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. It's on Augusta Highway,
They
196.
might advertise for it in Georgia if it's nearest the border.
Well, shit. I've been blaming it on Georgia all this time, and it was South Carolina.
Which she has to scrap her whole story.
Great. Thanks, Lou. Now I have nothing to talk about.
Sorry. It's permanently, if it helps, it's permanently closed, and it finished with 61 Google reviews and a 4.8.
Wow.
Yeah.
When we go down to Fort Garland, when we're driving down to Taos from there, there's a sign for like some dirty themed restaurant. And I was like, I'm looking this up, and I wish I can't. I've been trying to remember the name since we were talking about that. I can't. I'll see it next time I'm down there. But it's permanently closed. But now I want to know what the reviews are.
Yeah.
How many stars?
I will have to. Now I'll have to look that up. So anyway, while I'm looking into this story, and the guy that I'm going to be talking about, I came upon the term the Dixie Mafia.
Yeah.
Which I had heard before. So I'm like, well, what exactly is that? So first I got to look
at the designing women.
Don't I wish? So a lot of people, I think, I threw this out to a couple of people to see what, if they're listening, they're like, oh, you fucker, that was me, to see if they knew what the Dixie Mafia was. And everybody kind of has an idea about it, but I don't think many people understand what the Dixie Mafia was. Now, the real mafia, the imported from Italy mafia, that's very structured. That's very, there are levels.
There's a hierarchy.
You know, people have seen The Godfather, so they think they know what they're. I have never seen a Godfather movie, so, you know, sue me. Or people have read police procedurals and they read about it. So anyway, the Dixie Mafia is not well organized. It's mainly white, shocker, and mainly Southern. Well, of course, loosely headquartered in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Ugh.
And the reign of rednecks began in the late 60s. Some would argue that it continues to this day. So the chief activities of the Dixie Mafia involve transportation, and that's stolen merchandise, illegal alcohol, and illegal drugs. So they're moving shit that nobody's supposed to have. There is some murder for hire. There's actually quite a bit of murder for hire thrown in just to keep things lively. And I was surprised. So I'm like, because it didn't say moonshine, it said illegal alcohol. So I'm like, what's the difference?
Well, moonshine is a specific.
So
okay.
Stuff you make yourself and sell in a glass jar. Yep, that's moonshine. That is illegal. But there's also a big market, I did not know this, in knockoff booze, which is masquerading as the real thing. They're printing up their own labels and putting it in bottles. So, by the way, if you ever see a bottle of liquor and it looks like the label is crooked or misspelled, please don't drink it because you could go blind, because that stuff's not been sampled or tested or had the facilities inspected.
It was basically made in a toilet in prison and
or someone's outhouse. I don't know where.
Jail juice.
Yes. So it is the stuff that can make you go blind if it doesn't kill you first. All right. So just something to know. Cool. It can also include liquor that doesn't have the tax stamp.
Mm-hmm.
So taxes.
And then you just go to bars that are having financial trouble and they're just pouring house whiskey into the expensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, So anyway, in the beginning, the Dixie Mafia was loosely knit groups of criminals who traveled around a lot for the purpose of robbery, burglary, and theft. There wasn't really a chain of command. Whoever had the most money was in charge because he was considered to be the most successful.
Okay.
If you had the most money, you must be
That's
the best
America.
at what you do. Yeah. I'm going to just lock that up and throw away that key.
Sorry.
There was some murder for hire, but it was also a lot of the victims were people who threatened to testify against them. Either victims of their crimes or former members.
Yeah.
Who were trying to,
those are the worst.
Who were trying to cut a deal. Another interesting note, the Dixie Mafia was most active in rural areas where there wasn't a lot of law enforcement available to combat them.
Like Quantrill's raiders, like guerrillas. It's always the rural areas.
So what did exist was not well coordinated, and it was definitely not well funded. And in fact, the Dixie Mafia infiltrated so many law enforcement agencies. Let me say that again. They infiltrated so many law enforcement agencies to such an extent that in 1983, the federal authorities designated the entire Harrison County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office as a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
The FBI said they were out of control. That's a direct quote. I'm like, wow. Yeah. So after I looked at the Dixie Mafia, it had a little note. This was on Wikipedia. That led me to the Cornbread Mafia.
Nice.
And
no kidding.
I'm like, what's that? So, the Cornbread Mafia. Oh, and this will come back around because it comes back to Kentucky. It comes back to Patrick again. The Cornbread Mafia was the name for a group of Kentucky men who created the largest domestic marijuana production operation in United States history. In 1989, 70 men were arrested for organizing a trafficking ring that included 30 farms across 10 states.
Well, where's the cornbread?
I don't know.
Maybe that's just what they ate when they smoked their own product.
Perhaps.
They were like cornbread. I would.
Get the munchies.
That's right.
Yeah. The Cornbread Mafia led me to the Cowboy Mafia. I was on a roll, which I thought had definite Village People vibes, but it just the Cowboy Mafia. So, but no discos, no costumes. The Cowboy Mafia was the most prolific group of drug smugglers in the state of Texas in the 1970s. Through 1977-78, they imported more than 106 tons of marijuana. And in 1979, 26 members of the ring were tried and convicted. Now, I will tell you, because I'm me, I looked up the lesbian mafia. That is a very different, very political organization, and I would not make fun of them if you, for any reason.
Don't piss them off.
I'm not gonna.
Okay.
They have some very well-defined political beliefs, and I support a lot of what they say, but I'm just like, I'm not fucking with those people. I'm not making fun of them. Nuh-uh. Dixie Mafia, Cowboy, the drug smugglers, sure. Lesbians, no.
I was attacked by a lesbian in 1993.
What? Wow. You want to give us any more details on that?
I was living in Athens, Georgia at the time because I was born in Georgia. So a lot of what you're saying about Georgia, I'm like, yep.
Oh.
Yep. And we flew from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. to march on Washington for gay and lesbian equal rights. Mm-hmm. You may not know this. I'm straight. I'm demonstrably straight. And my friend is not, has never been. He didn't choose. He's always been gay. But I went with him because A, I wanted to support, and B, I want to make sure he didn't get in trouble. Because, those places are rife with trouble. So we're on the mall. We're on that long stretch of grass. And I'm out there getting sunburned because I'm ghost white pale. And I noticed this group of topless women, all of whom were, let's just say the word again, nubile, and wearing leather bandoliers and holding up placards. And on the placard, it had those round with the fuse bombs, like it's lit. It says militant lesbians for equal rights. And I'm smiling. I read the sign and then focused on what any other boy would focus on.
I mean, you know what? I'm impressed that you read the sign or knew there was a sign there, Lou.
Yes.
Because a lot would never have known there was a sign.
Exactly. And so I really look at the sign and then I'm staring at the Jubblies and I recognize that there's an ice cold wave and she's looking right at me like this. And she's very tan. I was very impressed that she had no tan lines at all. And I'm smiling. Apparently that's a brain reaction to Jubblies. And she says in accusatory tone, she says, "You're not gay." And I'm like, of course not. No, I'm not gay. And she hit me with her placard. She brought it down and hit me. And it wasn't a gentle hit. It was a like whack, like someone had a broomstick and hit you on the head with it. I was like, fuck, what did you hit me for? Stop staring. You forgot your shirt. I said, I'm here supporting you. What are you attacking me for? I'm on your side.
That's the best story.
I started off like most writers do with that line that you have to. I was attacked by a lesbian in 1993. Yeah.
Where in Georgia are you from?
Athens. It was a college town. Okay. My parents were young and silly and didn't use protection. And I came along and both sides of the family. It was a very Romeo and Juliet kind of family dynamic. My dad was in the more wealthy aspect. You know, his father is a doctor and my mom was not so wealthy. Her father was a chicken farmer and she got pregnant. And
there you were.
Yeah, there I was. And so both sets of parents were so upset with their respective kiddos that they didn't treat either one of them like adults. You're too young to have a kid like that. Give us a key to your house. We'll come over and we'll take care of the baby so you can continue going to school. And my mom looked at my dad and my dad looked at my mom and I'm 6 months old and they're like, F this. And they packed up the whatever car they had and they drove down to Miami to get away from both sets of parents and everybody they knew. And they went to school. My dad got his law degree at the University of Miami and became a lawyer. And my mom was a psychologist and she got her degree and I was raised in South Florida. So I don't have a Georgia accent until I go back. And then I'm like, how are you? I'm fixing.
Everybody I've met from Georgia, it's so fucking interesting.
It is. In many ways, there's the rules and but I want what I want. And that veil is very thin. Mm. And if you have something to get done and you hire somebody from Georgia, it gonna get done. It may not be legal.
But it's gonna get done.
It's gonna get done. I didn't mean to just you keep going. I want to hear about the lesbian mafia some more.
No. We're going back to the Dixie Mafia.
She got the mad at her.
No, I would not disrespect them for any reason. But anyway, back to the Dixie Mafia we go. And one of the most infamous members, Billy Sunday Burt. You got to admire somebody with the middle name of Sunday. I don't know. I can't throw stones because I have someone in my family tree whose first name was Orange.
Oh,
Orange Partlow.
They were their own knock-knock joke.
I was like, it's like, really? I could have died happily without.
And here I've been mocking Apple Paltrow or whatever the last name is of Apple, and it's a thing.
Well, yes, we were the trends.
Orange, glad it wasn't banana.
Oh God, okay.
I had to do it.
All right.
You didn't.
So Billy Sunday Burt was born in 1938 in Barrow County, Georgia, which is northeast of Atlanta toward Athens.
Yep.
He was born into a very poor family. He had a speech impediment. He worked in a sawmill, and reportedly, people either found him terribly charming or just absolutely terrifying.
Okay.
So, in 1954,
I am also sometimes between those two.
You're usually charming.
I'm older now. It used to lean toward terrifying all the time. So
some people probably are still terrified of you, but they should be. In 1954, when Billy was 17 years old, he married 12-year-old Ruby Nell. 12. Oh, 12. They had, I just was like, what the, but anyway, 12. They had 5 children together, and he was often gone for long periods of time with his work.
You had how many children with a 12-year-old?
5.
Okay. Just
not all at once. By the time she was 20, she's like, I'm done.
By the time she was 15. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but here's the thing. He had 3 sons and 2 daughters. All 3 of his sons were named Billy. And then they were called by their middle name. So there was Billy Stonewall, who was known as Stoney. Billy Montana, I didn't find out what his nickname was. If
We'll
he
just
had
call him Tana or Monty.
Monty. And then there was Billy Shenandoah, who went by Shane.
What?
So, yeah. So, in case you're wondering what the marriage was like, I was able to get 2 quotes from Ruby Now. She says, I remember I always wanted a garden. He said, okay, pretty woman, I'm going to fix you up a garden. But if I come home and catch you in the garden, I'm going to plow it up. I was out in my garden. He drove up, busted out laughing, took out his tractor and plowed up my garden. What? It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
He was getting ready to leave town for work to go rob or kill someone. And I went down. She says, I went down and I said, won't you stay with me and the kids tonight? He said, pretty woman, I can't. I've got things to do. I said, well, I was leaning against the door. I said, one day you're going to want me and I won't want you. He looked at me and said, pretty woman, you'll die then too.
Oh, Jesus.
I was like, so yeah.
He was a poet.
Wasn't he just? Wasn't he just?
Oh.
So most law enforcement agrees that Billy is probably responsible for around 50 deaths. The number varies. It can go higher. Even though there wasn't proof enough to charge him with all of them. They do think he was the most prolific killer in Georgia history.
Wow.
He was also proficient with dynamite and would blow places up if your entire family was inside. Too bad, says that.
Wow.
He also went to prison once for robbing the National Bank of Walton County. He ran liquor and drugs, and if it was illegal and he could make money off it, he probably did.
Cool. He was an entrepreneur, is what you're saying.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. He ultimately ended up in prison after being convicted of torturing and murdering an elderly couple, Lois and Reed Oliver Fleming, in Rennes, Georgia. So Billy Sunday Burt and Bobby Jean Gaddis were sentenced to death in Jefferson County for the December 22nd, 1973 torture and killing of Lois and Reed Oliver Fleming, who were aged 72 and 75 at the time. 3 other men, including the man who arranged the robbery killing, were granted immunity. And the third man, Charles Reed, was sentenced to life in prison. So Mr. Fleming was a retired car dealer who reportedly kept a large amount of cash hidden in his home because he didn't trust banks. So they were tortured with coat hangers around their necks while they were being questioned. So they would ask them and then tighten them and then loosen them to find out where the money was. So the 3 men made off with $4,000 in change for all their efforts.
Change.
Wow. Pennies, nickels, and dimes. That were buried in jars in the smokehouse. So that's not a large amount of cash split between all the men. It equates to about, by 2024 standards, it equates to about $28,000. So, I mean, yeah, for killing someone.
Yeah, not worth
it. And it's change. So their death sentences were eventually overturned. But Burt remained incarcerated because he'd been sentenced to life in prison for other crimes. That would be the 1972 murder of former associate Donald Chansey, for which he was tried and convicted in 1980. So it's while he was in jail, they got enough proof of one of these other murders. And these people start ratting each other out. They just don't stop talking because it was all people he'd worked with. And I'm like, how really? Somebody is in jail. They're 80 years old and you're taking their word on this. But, what do I know? So you can imagine the impact that Billy had on his family. He was rarely around. The first time he was sent to prison, his wife was left with $30 in her pocket and 5 children to take care of.
Ugh.
She also claimed at the trial where this couple was killed, there were photos shown at the trial, and she said that haunted her the rest of her life.
Oh, photos of bodies.
It was the woman laying on the bed, and her feet were splayed, and I think one of her shoes had fallen off, and it was that naked foot that just stayed with her. She said she saw it in her dreams. So she has written a book. It's, I believe, either self-published or very close to being self-published, because she got her GED, she raised chickens, she baked cakes, she drove a school bus, she worked any job she could to take care of her children. And she also stayed fairly loyal to Billy. She would visit him in prison the whole time, even after they were divorced, and she would take the children to visit him. And she was able to get him released from prison. This just fucking blows my mind. He was released from prison for one afternoon in 1992 so that he could be baptized by one of his sons.
All right.
Just what? No.
Characters. Everybody's a character.
Yeah. Ruby never talked about her life with Billy until sometime after he died. He reportedly killed himself in prison in 2017. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's 3 years earlier. And when she was talking with the guy who she co-wrote the book with, her story, her youngest son, Shane, remembered a story that his father had told him about a murder, because that's what you tell your kids, about a murder he had been part of that had taken place during a snowstorm in Boone, North Carolina. So it turns out in February 3rd, 1972, there was a snowstorm. A woman named Virginia Durham was on the phone with her daughter, Ginny, and her son-in-law, Troy Hall, when she told them there were men in the house holding her husband, Bryce, and her son, Bobby, hostage. Then the line went dead. So Ginny and Troy and a friend drive over to the Durham's house, and they found all three family members stacked in a downstairs bathtub. Bryce had been strangled, but Ginny and Bobby had been drowned. So on this particular case, authorities had no leads. They figured the snow covered their tracks. They couldn't figure out what happened. It wasn't until Billy Burt's son came forward in 2019 with the tip about his father's involvement. There was a sheriff, Len Hageman, who had investigated the case originally, and he began tracking down that tip and eventually identified Bill Sunday Burt, Billy Wayne Davis, Bobby Jean Gaddis, and Charles David Reed as the killers of the Durham family. Now, of those four men, only Davis was still alive, happened to be in jail, well and truly incarcerated. So he confirmed their involvement. Of course, he claimed he was only the driver and never went in the house. And he was apparently very cagey. When the investigators questioned him, he knew details about the house, but he would never say anything that they could use to prove he had been inside.
He was a little too savvy.
Yes. Ginny, the daughter, whose ex Troy was long suspected of orchestrating the hit for the insurance money, at least got a very small, and I'm talking tiny amount of satisfaction in knowing what really did happen to her family after all these years. So, there were only these two cases that they are absolutely 100% that he was tried and convicted for, but they feel like they've connected him to so many others. One of the sons, Shane, is working with an investigator trying to link him to other things. What's really, and I said I was going to bring it back around to his two sons, not, who's the middle one? Monty, not him. Shane and what was the other one's name?
He was,
Stonewall.
Oh, yeah.
He named his son Stone. Stonewall is a son named Stone. So these two gentlemen have
Hudson, so,
So these two boys have both released books about their dad. The difference being one of them, Stoney, wanted to live the same kind of life. He wanted to be a gangster and he just couldn't, for whatever reason, couldn't cut it off. But he argues that even though his dad was a criminal, he was a great dad. Like he was never there.
He wasn't there, bud.
Yeah. And the younger one.
But I mean, I guess he means he didn't beat him. And
apparently. But yeah, the younger son has taken is the totally opposite side. He wasn't a good dad. He wasn't a good husband. He wasn't a good anything, and is trying to help the police make all the connections. So again, the books are hard to find because I was like, fuck, I will read these, but not hard, not easy to get.
Yeah.
So.
As I've learned, every kid in a family has a different experience.
Yes.
So,
and oldest, and I don't know if the other one was the youngest, but certainly younger. I can't even remember the name of it. Isn't Ruby in the title?
Grace and Disgrace, Living with Faith and the Leader of the Dixie Mafia, Ruby
Yes.
Nell Burt,
Fun.
as told to Phil Hudgens.
And it's really funny because now people are like, oh, he was the head of the Dixie Mafia. But people who've studied the Dixie Mafia are like, yeah, there wasn't one central head. There were people who were in charge of different areas. But there was no, and if they needed to, they could cooperate with another group to pull something off. But it wasn't an interconnected thing like you think of when you say mafia.
Right.
So my sources were, of course, Wikipedia, QC News, Murderpedia. Murderpedia let me down this time. They had
Sometimes.
they have trial transcripts. And I was like, I can't decipher these.
Oh.
You can get some stuff out of them, but I was like, it was page after page of, yeah. But they had some good stuff. The Gwinnett Forum, Atlanta Journal and Constitution, NBC News, and the Crew Burkeville Journal.
You know, somebody lives in Gwinnett.
Do you?
Yeah.
You don't look happy about it. Alrighty.
Yeah. But so I just, what I've come away with is I need to start a mafia. So what would I call a Colorado mafia? We actually have a lot of mafia stuff, especially in Denver.
See, I am trying to get the menopause mafia going.
Yeah.
So
The Red Hat Society.
that would be a good cover for the menopause mafia.
You think it isn't? You think they're all in it?
Right. Right.
You think they're getting together for tea and crumpets? They're like, all right, Martha, you had 3 people on your docket. 2 of them are still alive. What's going on?
I had whatever that Red Hat Society or whatever it's called come when I was working at the restaurant. So
That's how I
just
saw
say
them.
that was interesting.
And it's because it's purple purple clothes, and a red hat.
Yep, it's from that.
Yeah,
point.
they're kind of notorious in restaurant circles conversations because typically they descend on a place aren't necessarily nice and don't necessarily tip.
Oh,
Yeah,
Right.
that's all I know.
okay.
So they came in and I wasn't expecting much and I wasn't let down. How about that? So
My menopause mafia will tip well.
okay, great. Great. I thought, what is it? Roper. The Roper moo gathering.
Yes.
Thing, the bar crawls or whatever they do.
I love the Mrs. Roper bar crawls. I want to do one.
You guys know that exists.
No, I do.
I think that would be fun. I'm not wearing a wig.
With the orange hair, big beaded necklaces that jangle. Yep.
Yeah.
I have the caftan and the necklace and the bracelet.
All right.
I'm ready. I don't have enough hair.
You have to frizz your hair. You have to, or put a wig on. I think that was a wig. There's no way that was. Can you imagine how much final net it took to hold that up?
Well, back then they were using Final Net like it was
Yep.
the thing.
Chlorofluorocarbons, the hole in the ozone, final net.
Oh my gosh, that was another of those things that was like constantly being taught to Gen Xers was going to basically in the.
Yeah.
I remember a Scholastic News issue that we covered, and I was in 5th grade because I remember like I can visualize the classroom and everything with that thing and what a concern it was, and me like going home and wondering if we had CFCs and policing my parents because it was creating the hole in the ozone and we were all going to fry and die. You know, like it was a huge. I remember being so fixated on the stupid CFC thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the hairspray cans.
We're going to murder the polar bears. They're going to bake.
Right. I mean, they really peddled that to us in Scholastic. I would love to see that article now and just read it and see if it was as dire as it came across.
It was
Probably.
It was geared to have the most impact on 5th graders, I think.
That's right. So those were great. Just getting those. I missed Scholastic. Once my kids weren't in elementary school anymore, I couldn't go to book fairs.
You can.
I could be this weird lady that goes to an elementary school where I have no children. You're correct.
Do you want me to let you know next time I'm going to one? I went to one not that long ago. Well, it had to been while school was in session. Amy's Grands, their school had one.
Oh,
I was like, oh my God, I can go with you. Oh, I was so excited. But they didn't have any adult books. See, when our elementary school did the book fair, they always had a section of books for adults.
Oh, I don't remember any of mine having that at the school, like adult books.
I mean, they were very carefully curated.
Well, yeah.
They didn't have 50 Shades of Grey.
They had young adult, and I think that was about the peak of it at the elementary. I always bought the teacher wish lists when I could.
And the pens. Oh my God. The pens, the tchotchkes.
You always have to have the tchotchkes because I didn't have money as a kid, so I could never get anything from Scholastic, and I'd sit there and I'd circle all the books I wished I could get and couldn't get. And then once I was a mom, I was like, well, a lot of these are cheaper than I could get. I would buy a bunch of the $1 because they always had $1 specials, and I'd get a bunch of those and put them out for trick or read too, or donate them or whatever. But I was like, $1, hook me up.
Yeah. I didn't have money for the Scholastic book fairs either, and in seventh grade, I went. They had all the books in the library, so they came in and they set up all these tables, and they had all the books. And I went through, and I knew I didn't have the money for it, but I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal one book, not two, because two, that's taking money out of the people that put it together, their pockets, and I didn't want that to happen. But with so many books, I could justify one. Remember, I was a seventh grader. So I looked through all the books, and I picked one that looked really intriguing. It was called the Philadelphia Experiment.
Oh, yeah.
It was about a battleship that could disappear and then reappear somewhere else. And so I took that book and I walked around like, this is what I'm going to buy. And I walked up to the cashier and I go, hold on a second, I'll be back. Turned around, walked back towards the shelves and took a fast right into basically a closet where they had stored projector machines and slide carousel. And I took it and I put it on the shelf. And then I went back out and picked up another one and walked up and said, how much is this? Like it was the same book. This is my devious seventh grade mind. And she said, it's $1.95. I'm like, I can't. And I gave it to her and then I walked out. 2 weeks later, long gone. I waited 2 weeks so that the trail would be cold.
That's a lot of patience for a seventh grader.
Yes, it was. And I knew Mrs. Franklin was the librarian. She was really nice to me because I'd come in middle school, junior high, I was reading 2 books a day. I'd come in, I'd get 2 hardback science fiction. I could tell there was the yellow sticker with a little red like molecule on it. And I'd read them in class. The teacher would call on me, like give him the answer. And I'd go back to reading. I'd read in the hallway. I'd read at lunch. I'd read in the hallway in between. I got straight C's. But I was reading 2 books a day. And so she thought I was crazy. And she was real kind to me. And she never knew. And I haven't told anybody I stole that book till just now. But I did. I read it over and over and over again. And it talked about the ship disappearing and reappearing and the people that were on the ship at the time for the rest of their lives. Sometimes their hand would go like invisible and they would come back. And they didn't explain any of the science. I'm thinking, why have a book that talks about a disappearing ship if there's not instructions and how to replicate this for, like your car or your bike? Like I'd love to ride an invisible bike, right? Or ride my bike and end up in another state because it just moved for whatever reason.
Right. That doesn't make any sense.
It was I felt guilty. I felt guilty about stealing it because it wasn't worth it.
Oh no. That made me think though, like I remember my elementary school librarian's name too, because that was such a
Mrs. Wheeler.
I had Mrs. Brody, and she had a very particular way of speaking, and
very, very enunciating everything very clearly.
And I still remember I hear urban, suburban, and rural in her voice every time I see one of those words because she taught us something about that. And I just loved the way she spoke. And every little once in a while, I find somebody who speaks like that. But it's rare. So I don't know what it was. It wasn't an accent. It was the way she spoke. So yeah, but like that tells me that librarian, like the media center librarians or whatever are impactful as well, because I couldn't tell you what my music teacher's name was at that elementary school. I can name all but one of my teachers there. I actually have a complete block on 3rd grade. I cannot remember 3rd grade at all there. It's the craziest thing. I know which pod I was in because we had pods in Maryland and it was basically like classroom cubicles, right? And there weren't walls. There were just these cubicle kind of walls, and then a big open space in the center where we would all come together for stuff. I remember I was in that pod. I remember once not doing an assignment and coming in with like a piece of computer part from my dad and being like, I don't remember what it is. And I didn't do this because I got a bunch of Encyclopedia Britannica or Encyclopedia Brown books from the library, and I was reading them. And so this is from my dad. I don't know what it does. I remember what it looked like still, but I couldn't tell you what it was.
Can I get an A? Can I get an A? Here's the thing.
But that's it. I don't remember anything about that classroom.
Yeah.
It's gone. And I'm like, what happened there? I have such a vivid memory of everywhere else, but third grade is gone.
We don't talk about the abduction and what they did to you.
That's
as long as you don't
What
remember it,
the
you'll sleep
aliens
at night.
did.
Yeah.
Because, I laid there just petrified every night because we were under the path of the airport, and I was sure an airplane was going to fall on me, and it would take me forever to fall asleep because every time a plane come over, I would panic again.
This is it.
So I figure one of those was a UFO. And, they took me and they did their dastardly experiments. And so I forgot third grade. Except I can remember going into the G&T, the gifted and talented room that year. So I have memories, but zero memories in that classroom.
Fifth grade for me was my first. I got bused to a different school.
Oh, okay.
And I met other neurodivergent people.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of the people I was in G&T and what is it called? I was in two different things. One was Olympics of the Mind and one was Odyssey of the Mind. And one of those, they were both brain things, but one of those is in Little Man Tate. I was in both of them. I was in the Little Man Tate one in Oregon. So I am sure I was in all those things with probably quite a collection of people I did not know were neurodivergent. But yeah, no, lots of good stuff back then. But you know what? We're at our 2-hour point.
What?
Yeah, it's already the end. So I'm going to recommend a brain dead show that I've been watching with my husband when we want to turn our brains off. And it is called Bar Rescue. And it's basically an even more aggressive man than Chef Ramsay going to bars and helping save their bars, right? He totally rebrands them and everything, which I find fascinating as somebody who has a business degree and I had an emphasis in marketing. So I've watched that with fascination of how quickly you can rebrand and become successful and something like that. But anyway, he legit, speaking of mafia, we've all joked that he's like mafia. He's this big beefy dude. And whenever he walks, he puts his head forward like a bull and just pulls forward in his hole. He's got the arms that swing. And
I've seen the ads for that show.
I find it interesting. And again, it's just, we always have like some sort of reality show like that, that style that we watch. Yeah. Like Kitchen Nightmares and stuff that we watch for.
I like those house flipping shows because a lot of the stuff they do, I can do. So I'm like, I have this Dunning-Kruger conviction that if I watched enough of the shows, I'll know everything I need to know. And my brain, the one that works, says no.
We have at times watched those too, and it's the same thing where basically my husband can say, hold my beer, right? Because he could do the thing and he can learn something, or he can be like, well, that was a terrible way to do that. But do you remember there was one, and I can't remember the name of it, and I swear it only laid it like one season, but they would go in, people would write, they would go into their house, they would have one room that they would theme a very specific room, just that room. Like one was a Star Trek room, for example, or somebody might have had a horror room and it might be their bedroom, it might be their living room or their den or something like that. And they would go in and just make over this room completely into like a Star Trek room. I almost said, woo, how to piss off Star Wars and Star Trek fans at the same time. Mix them up. Anyway, yeah, it was a really cool show. I wish I remember what it was called, but we watched that one and we loved it. So we were like, we could have a room like this. Of course, both of us are like, yeah. Probably good we got through that phase and didn't actually do the thing. But I mean, it would be like the control room on the Enterprise or whatever. They redid. I can't remember what all they did, but it was the bridge, right? From Star Trek. In this room, and they had working gizmos and lights and stuff. It was so cool, but yeah,
that would be cool.
That was the best.
Yeah, I like those kinds of shows because I always learn something.
Yeah.
You have to know people, though. You have to.
We have like a little binder, and we've been failing recently at filling out, but we have a little binder if we ever were to build our own home of ideas we've liked, of stuff we've seen in there. And store. I'm fascinated right now with storage and storage solutions in tiny homes. The stuff they can pull off. I'm like, we could use that no matter how big the home, but I'm also kind of fascinated by tiny homes right now because we stayed at we have our little yurt in the mountains, right? And it actually utilizes space really well. And this place we went to Mexico, that was an Airbnb we really loved. It was basically a 2-story apartment, and you could totally make something like that. I'm just fascinated by how they can do it because I'm really tired of giant house thing. I feel like we've created our own housing crises by building all these giant houses, right?
Well, have you ever seen, I can't remember what the name of it is, but the gist of the show is that the host goes to people who have won the lottery and helps them buy a ginormous, expensive house.
Okay.
And I'm like, but there's 2 of you. Why do you need all that much house?
My lottery dream home.
And I say this as a person who feels my house is way too big, but financially it's time for us to stay here and fix that later. But when we were younger, it was get the bigger house, have more room. We need this and this and this. And now we're like, we could live in a little 1-bedroom yurt on the coast and be really happy right now, as long as we could be outdoors most of the time.
Yeah. Well, Kelly and I are talking about bailing. I have a house that's rented, and this is her house. She had this house built for us. And there's going to come a time here in the next 10 years where I think we both retire because we're about that age and get all the money out of both of the houses and then pool the money. We're not married, and we don't mix our finances, which is good for her, not for me. She makes way more than I do. And to get like a mountain home, but we talked about getting the land first, like, with your and then, building something small, like put a camper on it. I'm like, why spend the money on the camper? Let's just, pour a foundation and do it. But mine, like my list would be, it has to be near running water, which is really hard to find in Colorado. Yeah. Not so hard to find in the South. And a wraparound porch.
I love a wraparound porch.
I would, yes, I could live with you. Running water and a wraparound porch.
I feel like my grandparents did this really smart. And so I kind of aspire to like this because we also want property. Like we kind of go back and forth. We want the ocean. We want mountain property. We want both. We'll go there at different times of the year, whatever. But so what they did is, this was my grandma's second marriage. And he had bought this plot of land in Sisters, Oregon. It's the mountains there. And he had this land for the longest time, and he kind of would camp on it. And that was it. So when they decided it was time to actually build a structure on it, the first structure they built on it was a 2-car garage, basically nice and deep, had a bathroom in it and everything, and an apartment on the top, right? Yeah. A studio. And it had its little kitchenette. It had it was perfect for if you just wanted to get away, right? And then eventually, once they retired, they did build a full house on it. And then they kept that. They had their garage with their little suite, and guests could stay there. So we'd stay there instead of in the house, even though they had like 3 bedrooms or something. But I thought that was just the smartest way to do it because they had a livable space.
Right.
No matter what happened, they had this livable space, and it was still useful after they were able to build a bigger home. And even if they'd never built that bigger home, they would have had this. So that's my whole thing. I'm like, not a camper. Yeah. And my husband grew up in mobile homes, so he doesn't want to go near anything like that. He's that's a traumatic time. We're not doing that. So camper would be out too, but yeah, like I was like, that's smart. That's how you should do it. Yeah. Cause both sets, 2 of my 3 sets of grandparents built their own homes when on their retirement, because everybody had farms before, and my other grandparents built a house on Beverly Beach overlooking the ocean. So they were able to retire from their farms and do something like that. That's not too shabby.
No.
Yeah. Nice. But times were different. And that's why it's got to be Thailand or Mexico or Portugal.
This wage differential between how much we can earn and how much college and housing costs has gotten to a point where the middle class is destroyed. And I don't think that's politics because it happens to both sides.
No, it's what we're all living. So yeah.
So,
I think people have to be realistic, and unless we can fix that, then a lot of us are going to have to bail. But also, I'm fascinated by the digital nomad, visa that you can get now. So I could still have my remote job here, and I could be living somewhere else on a digital nomad visa, and I love that. And I only discovered that in the last year or two. So now I'm like, must learn more. Because my husband is in computer. He could very easily also work remotely. So, you know, food for thought. But anyway, people don't want to listen to this. But so, I'm going to call it. But we have lots of things to talk about some other time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today. All right. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yes, we will be back next month.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back with more shenanigans.